The morning mist still covered the mountains when Marcus parked the car in front of the dark wooden cabin. The silence was absolute, broken only by the creaking of the boards under Elena, Sophia, and Daniel's feet as they unloaded the luggage. The structure seemed forgotten by time, with fogged windows and a porch covered in dry leaves. During the first day, the four friends managed to relax as planned. They made a bonfire, played cards, and laughed until late. The cabin, despite its somber appearance, offered the perfect refuge from the hectic city life. When they retreated to their rooms, exhaustion overcame them quickly. On the first dawn, they all awakened with a strange sensation of being watched. Marcus was the first to mention during breakfast that he had dreamed of a hooded female figure, standing at the foot of his bed, simply watching in silence. Elena laughed nervously and admitted to having had exactly the same dream. Sophia and Daniel exchanged uneasy glances before confirming the same experience. The coincidence disturbed them momentarily, but they soon dismissed the incident as a result of the unfamiliar environment. The second night brought different intensity. The dream returned for everyone, but this time the hooded woman did not remain silent. Her hoarse and distorted voice pronounced each of their names with chilling familiarity. Marcus, Elena, Sophia, Daniel. The names echoed in their dreams like an ancestral call, laden with an authority that none of them could understand. Upon awakening, they discovered physical evidence that made it impossible to dismiss the events as nighttime illusions. Marcus found 3 parallel scratches on his left arm. Elena discovered a purple bruise on her neck, perfectly circular like finger marks. Sophia noticed that her hair had been elaborately braided while she slept. Daniel found dirt under his nails. Though he had not left his room, objects throughout the cabin had also changed position. Books that were on the shelf now formed organized piles in the center of the room. The kitchen chairs had been arranged in a circle, all facing a specific point on the floor where nothing existed. The curtains, which they had left open, were completely closed and tied from the inside with ropes that had not existed before. The third night arrived heavy with apprehension. None of them wanted to sleep, but exhaustion inevitably overcame them. The dream returned with amplified force. The hooded woman now moved, walking slowly around their beds. Her heavy breathing echoed like supernatural wind. She extended her hands toward each of them, long and gaunt fingers almost touching their faces. When she spoke their names, her voice seemed to come from multiple directions simultaneously. At dawn, the physical marks had intensified. Everyone bore new scratches and bruises. More disturbing still, they found barefoot prints on the cabin floor, prints that led from room to room, but which did not correspond to any of their feet. The marks were small and delicate, like a woman's, but left deep impressions in the wood. The decision to leave was unanimous. They packed with desperate haste, avoiding looking at the dark corners where shadows seemed to move independently. When Marcus tried to start the car, the engine remained completely silent. He checked the battery, cables, all the components he could identify, but the vehicle refused to give any sign of life. It was Daniel who first noticed the impossibility that surrounded them. The road by which they had arrived, a clearly marked dirt trail between the trees, had simply disappeared. In place of where the path should be, they found only impenetrable dense vegetation, as if the forest had grown decades in a single night. The trees intertwined unnaturally, forming deliberately constructed barriers. They tried to cut their way through the vegetation, but discovered that each severed branch regenerated instantly. The plants seemed to have a life of their own, reacting to their presence with subtle but unmistakable movements. Leaves curved away from their hands, roots emerged from the ground to block their steps, and a constant whisper emanated from the forest itself. On the fourth night, none of them could keep their eyes closed for more than a few minutes, but sleep claimed them even against their will, and the dream that followed transcended any previous experience. The hooded woman was no longer confined to the foot of their beds. She walked freely through the cabin, her presence filling every corner, every shadow. Her form began to solidify, becoming less ethereal and more tangible. For the first time, they could partially see her face under the hood. The skin was pale as ancient porcelain, stretched over prominent bones that created deep shadows around. Her eyes, These were completely black, without distinguishable iris or pupil, like infinite wells that seemed to suck the light. When she smiled, she revealed teeth too long and too sharp for a human face. Upon awakening, they discovered that the boundary between dream and reality had completely dissolved. The hooded woman had left physical evidence of her visit. Wet footprints marked the floor, though there had been no rain. The air carried a sweet and sickening aroma of decomposing flowers. More disturbing still, they found strands of black hair scattered across the pillows, hair that belonged to none of them. The cabin's objects continued to reorganize themselves. Kitchen knives appeared embedded in the walls, forming complex geometric patterns. Mirrors reflected images that did not correspond to reality, showing additional figures that were not physically present. The windows, even when open, did not allow natural light to enter, as if the cabin existed in a separate dimension. The fifth morning brought the most terrifying revelation. The hooded woman was no longer confined to dreams. Elena saw her first, a silhouette standing on the porch, watching through the kitchen window. When she called the others, the figure had disappeared, but her impression remained in the dust on the glass. During the day, sightings became more frequent. Marcus saw her reflected in a polished metal pan. Sophia noticed her shadow moving independently on the wall. Daniel felt her cold breath on his neck while examining the engine. Each encounter lasted only seconds, but left an indelible mark of terror that accumulated like poison. As the sun set, they understood that the hooded woman was progressively materializing. Their dreams had been a process of invocation, each night bringing her closer to physical reality. They were the instruments of her manifestation, their minds serving as bridges between the world of dreams and the waking world. The cabin began to exhibit signs of supernatural transformation. The walls seemed to pulse as if made of living flesh. The floor tilted at impossible angles, creating the sensation that they were walking on the walls. Doors opened to rooms that had not existed before, revealing spaces that extended far beyond the physical limits of the structure. When night finally arrived, the hooded woman appeared in the main room, completely materialized. Her presence filled the environment with energy that made the air vibrate. She did not speak, but her intention was clear through communication that transcended words. She had called them through dreams, had manipulated reality to keep them trapped, and now she was awake and hungry for something they could not understand, but felt on a primitive and terrifying level. The four friends gathered in the center of the room, backs to each other, watching the hooded woman circle around them with movements that seemed to defy gravity. Her feet did not touch the ground, but left impressions that smoldered as if the wood were being burned by ice. The air around her distorted vision, creating ripples that made it seem she existed partially in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The night progressed. Reality continued to deteriorate. The cabin expanded and contracted like a living organism breathing. The windows showed constantly changing landscapes, sometimes snow-covered mountains, sometimes arid deserts, sometimes tempestuous oceans that crashed against glass that should have been miles from any body of water. The hooded woman had finally awakened completely, and her presence transformed the cabin into a nexus between worlds where the laws of physics and logic no longer had meaning. The four friends understood, with terrifying clarity, that they had become a permanent part of something much larger and older than their minds could process, trapped in a cycle that would repeat forever in the mountains where time and space obeyed only the will of an entity that had waited decades to awaken again. Darkness hides in the details. If you made it this far, the story must have pulled you in. Leave a like, drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to Alma Occulta and ring the bell. That way, you won't miss the next dive into terror and mystery. Until next time, if the night allows it.